So getting into this week's episode of Defending Jacob, which is Visitors, which another solid episode. Again, I wish this had been a binge. All the criticisms that I would apply to last week's episode would apply here, but I really did enjoy this episode. But before I get into the specific things that I enjoyed about it, if you're new to the channel, and if you're interested in seeing more videos like this one, and my reviews of other shows as they come out, please consider subscribing. And if you have thoughts and comments on this week's episode or anything that I say, please leave them in the comment section. I always appreciate that, and I like the discussion that we can have. So getting into this week's episode. So for me, this was a good episode, not a great episode. Again, not that much happened. The investigation is moving at a snail's pace, which makes it really hard to just watch one episode. I want the whole thing. I want to know how it ends. So I've considered, if I wasn't doing these weekly reviews, I would probably wait until like all the episodes were available and then finish the show. But that's just me. I don't know if anyone else has considered doing that. If you have, let me know in the comments section. I find it interesting to hear how people watch different shows and how they prefer to watch different shows. So in this instance, I think the most interesting scene with the character of Billy Barber, played by J.K. Simmons, wasn't the scene that we got, which was with him and his son, Andy, played by Chris Evans. I thought the most interesting scene between Billy Barber was the scene that we didn't get to see, which was the scene with him and Lori, played by Michelle Dockery, because Andy goes in, and for all his talk of being willing to do anything for his son, he really wouldn't bend at all with his dad. Now, I realize he doesn't trust his dad, and he's afraid of just giving this man, who is clearly just a wicked man, this opportunity to hurt him. It would be quite a twist if Billy Butcher turned out to not have done what he's been accused of. That would be quite a twist, but I don't think that's what's going on. But the conversation was interesting for the moment when Billy essentially says, "You have no loyalty. I know that I'm the bad guy." He literally calls himself the bad guy, which is kind of on the nose writing. But he says, I know I'm the bad guy, but you should have been more loyal to me. And he's blaming his son for never coming to visit him and for not, keeping in touch with him no matter what. And I feel like that's going to come into play in however this series ends. And it's going to be this decision that Andy has to make, whether he's going to be loyal to Jacob no matter what, or if he's going to turn his back on him because it turns out that he did something terrible. And the most interesting scene, though, to me for this episode was the scene that we didn't get to see, because Andy utterly failed to get, he had no emotional intelligence in this scene, and he failed to get Billy to help him to do what they needed to get the exculpatory evidence for Jacob. But in contrast, Lori went, and we didn't get to see this scene, and she somehow convinced Billy to give them the evidence that they needed. And I'm really interested to hear how that happened, and I don't know how they're going to show it or when they're going to show it, so that's interesting. I wonder when that will come into play. I wonder if it will be like a pivotal scene at the end or not. I feel like Michelle Dockery is really starting to steal the show, and I think it's because Andy is just very, very closed off, and he is a lot more stoic, keeping his cards close to his vest, whereas she is really, really emotionally vulnerable, and you just want to give her a hug at every given moment. And a lot of bad things happen for her this episode. I feel like the story is getting a little repetitive in the way that they show Lori longing to participate in the real world. In this episode, you see her seeing her friends all attending this class graduation at the high school, but she can't, and real life is just going on without her, and she's longing to be a part of it, which we got to see, in last week's episode as well. And again, we have this lady her son was murdered, and I feel like she deserves a lot of sympathy, but we get to see her in just this terrible light where she just spits on Lori at the store. It just leaves Lori devastated. And, it's just becoming a little repetitive where, Lori is like, I just want to have a normal life. I just want to be happy again. And then someone's really mean to her. And this episode, we got to see her open up to the person who's helping them to find evidence against the DNA theory that, you know, there's this murder gene. And she opened up to Elizabeth Vogel, who is helping them to research the possibility of this theory. And, you know, this was one of the better scenes of the episode, I felt, because it, again, Laurie is being really, really vulnerable, and Michelle Dockery is just killing it here. And she kind of talks to her about how she could have different views of her son existing in her mind at the same time, and she's just not sure how to see him. And, you know, it's interesting because I feel like that's kind of how the audience feels at this point. We have coexisting views of Jacob in our own minds. Like, we can see him as this innocent child who's the victim of circumstances, but we can also see him quite easily as potentially an evil murderer. In this episode, you know, Andy investigated some more, and to me, he's being really, really incompetent at this whole thing. Like, I think he's just worsening the situation with the way he keeps approaching people. And it doesn't really seem like he read How to Win Friends and Influence People, because the way he approaches people seems overly aggressive. And I just don't know why he expects people to open up to him. This week he approached both Sarah, who is his son's friend, and we found out, you know, of course, that she feels bad because she knew that Derek had the phone that the police had been looking for, and that, you know, went missing from Ben. And she also, you know, it's questionable whether she was being friends with Jacob because she actually likes him, or if just because she feels guilty because of that. And Jacob has a very bad response to that, and shows, you know, him just becoming more and more isolated because this one friend that he has, he's pushing away. And, you know, we also see, to me, it's interesting. We see this theme of isolation playing out across the story, but it's particularly interesting because, again, we get this scene where Andy takes Jacob fishing, and you can see him trying to bond with his son and to just treat his son as if he's innocent. And you just really, you know, increasingly wonder, you know, why he's not talking to his son, because he knows that his son has this fetish of some kind of, like, this sight cutter, which is, you know, they don't show a whole lot of, thankfully, but it seems to be some pretty disturbing stuff. And, you know, it's a hint that maybe there's more going on in Andy's son's psyche than we've seen so far. And, you know, there's just little glimmers of darkness in Jacob so far, but they haven't really shown us how dark he is yet. But to me, it was interesting. I feel like a scene that really has informed my understanding of the show early on was the scene where Jacob and Andy were talking about Catcher in the Rye. And Jacob just said, you know, I don't know with all these stories why they have to have all the symbolism and all the literary themes. Why can't people just let a story just be? Why does it have to have all the layers of meaning? And I kind of feel like that's how Defending Jacob is developing. And that was kind of them signaling their intentions with the show, is that they just want to let the story be. They're not trying to have a whole lot going on beneath the surface. There's not a whole lot of deeper meaning here. And, you know, as a melodrama, this show works really well. It's really well shot. You see the effort in every frame. It's got better cinematography than 98% of the shows on television, and really good acting. And that's been enough so far to keep me reasonably well entertained. But, you know, I feel like I don't think you should be opposed to symbolism and deeper meaning per se. To me, I feel like those could have added something to the show, because so far it's just kind of what you see is what you get. And, you know, I feel like that will appeal to some people, but to me, I feel like there could be, you know, an effort to have the engaging emotional aspects and to go deeper. So those are my thoughts on episode 5, Visitors. But what did you think? Let me know in the comments section. And if you want to see more videos like this one, please consider subscribing to the channel. And as always, you can watch more videos like this one right now.